Okay, Capricorn. My head's a little... Okay. Hello, Capricorn. My name is Kristen Simone Hansen, and welcome to SeaGoat Secrets. Okay, Capricorn, so this is a part, this video is about soul ties, and it is a part of the kind of series about love with Capricorn energy that I said I was going to be talking about in honor of this transformational Capricorn Venus and how it has transformed all of us in terms of the way we see ourselves and the things we want in our love life. In this video, you're going to get a full rundown of soul ties, understanding soul ties in general, and then also how it pertains to Capricorn placements in specific, both through the masculine and feminine principles. If you would like to dive deeper with me as a client and get to know yourself in terms of love and relationships, or anything else along those lines, you can find the link here and also below and join the healing circle and start your new life. You guys know that I'm a global citizen and I love connecting with all of you on a worldly and global level. So of course, per usual, drop where you're listening from in the comments so I can connect with you and know where you are. All right, so with all that being said, let's get into this. Let's talk a little bit about soul ties. This is something that this video is very important to me because this conversation has been coming up a lot. I would say I've seen it often on the internet and like various socials, but a lot of people have been talking about it, and I find integrating their old, mostly Christian belief systems and ideologies around the notion of soul ties and soul tie energy, tying things like Puritanism and like just a lot of really Christian-based belief systems that are integrating into something that goes way beyond something like Christianity or any of the modern day religions. So I wanted to debunk some things and talk about some myths and give you guys the best I guess advice in terms of navigating this energy, especially for Capricorns, as you guys can really attach yourself to individuals and individuals can really attach themselves to you because of your devil energy. So let's begin in terms of soul ties in general and what we, on average, what has been talked about in terms of pop culture and what people know of it. So for the most part, I would say that people think of soul ties as the bond that you create with someone when you develop what I've seen is people say a sexual relationship with someone. So the bond that you create when you develop a sexual relationship with someone and how pieces of your soul connect and tie to each other and bond with one another permanently. The full interpretation of that is soul ties are created and formed whether you're having sex with someone or not. They are when you open up a viewpoint of your vulnerability to another individual, you are creating a bond, especially if you and that person had some kind of a soul contract before even basically putting yourself on the planet. If you guys had some kind of thing from a past life or whatever it is in terms of your souls connecting, that's already a tie with another individual that was already set in stone. But nonetheless, in terms of opening yourself vulnerably, or in terms of opening yourself in the sense of your vulnerability or piece of yourself, a part of your soul, is when you create that bond with another person. When you are having sex with another individual, you can in fact protect yourself from, the same way how you can protect yourself in general, you can in fact protect yourself from creating a strong soul bond with that individual. And there are different ways to do that, especially when diving into the Tantra, which I'm a big practicer of Tantra and Tantric work. And one of the things that you can do is creating a barrier within between you and the other individual. But it's something that you have to consciously do prior to interacting with this person. The idea that a soul tie is something that just automatically happens and you're soul bonded and you need to not have sex, especially if you're a woman. Again, with the Puritanism, no. You can protect yourself in terms of protecting your vulnerability. And in fact, a lot of us tend to be very good at this in our younger ages, at various times in our lives when we're feeling like we're in a hookup phase, or we're kind of single and mingling, or whatever it is. It's a conscious thing that you do within yourself, where you say that there is a boundary and a barrier between you and another individual. Now, usually that makes it so that when you are having a physical, intimate moment with this person, yeah, there is a lack of emotional intensity. There's a lack of an emotional connection. Usually that's how people deal with that. And there is a psychological disconnection that you do. But you can, in fact, especially when you dive deep into the sexual healing work, you can have a very strong bond with an individual without creating a soul tie. But that, again, is diving into some really deep spiritual work in terms of knowing how to protect yourself and be vulnerable in the moment, and break whatever tie can take place after the fact. We are creators of our own reality in the most practical sense. If you do not want to create a bond with an individual, as long as you are consciously putting that into a dynamic, like a prayer or an intentionality, you can in fact do so. If you do not do that or protect yourself from an individual, especially if an individual has an incubus or succubus energy, then yes, you are stuck within a tie that is very, very difficult to disconnect from. Understanding that we are all connected, no matter whether you are in a physical connection with someone or just an emotional connection with someone, when you interact with people and let them into your lives in general, you are creating bonds and ties if you are willing to. It is not just a notion of the physical, intimate act in itself. And a lot of that is derived, again, from puritanistic Christian ideologies bleeding into conscious work, bleeding into spiritual work, and really distorting the perspective and kind of being used as a way to further some really strange viewpoints of sexism and just different things that people are doing to kind of, I don't know, I call it like the new agey type of stuff, that is just really distorted and backwards. In general, it is important to protect yourself spiritually all the time, regardless of how you are interacting with someone, especially when you're interacting sexually, because yes, you are opening a huge viewpoint of your vulnerability. And in order to disconnect, it requires a huge part of you to create a wall between yourself and another person, even though you are partaking in the most vulnerable act that you can have with someone, regardless of how much you try to disconnect psychologically or emotionally. And a lot of people are just not necessarily equipped to do so. So if that is in fact the case, then yes, be very wary of who it is that you interact with and why. So now to my next point in terms of understanding how to break a soul tie, or understanding the impact that a soul tie can have on you. I guess first we'll talk about the impact that a soul tie can have on you. So if you are connected to an individual and you feel bonded and chained to an individual, especially one with an incubus or succubus type personality type, it can really ruin you and or destroy you. Slowly, as you eat away at yourself, you can develop obsessive thoughts. This pretty much goes back to being a Capricorn in specific. You can develop an obsession, you can develop an extreme sexual obsession with an individual, or an individual can develop an extreme sexual obsession with you. In general, you guys can attract obsession and or partake in obsession. So the bonds that you can create with people can be so intense and so strong because of that devil energy that it can feel borderline unbreakable, even if you wanted to disconnect from a person. But especially for those of you who are Capricorns with 8th house placements, you can attract a lot of stalking at some point in your life. You probably had some kind of a stalker or a stalking situation, or people being a little bit too bonded or connected to you, wanting to control you in some way, shape, or form, or not let you go, all the way down to something very dangerous. Versus if you were a Capricorn with Scorpio placements, you could have possibly been the person who found yourself feeling that way about other people and not knowing how to break that bond or that disconnection because of the intensity of the energy. So you guys are more equipped to developing these kind of ties and bonds. Again, when we think of double energy, I was going to pull the card. So Capricorn, let's take a look at these. Okay. Understanding the devil. What do we see? We see bounds, chains, obsessions, restrictions. The devil card is also an indication of things like sex addictions, addictions to, speaking of soul ties, right? So if we're talking about soul ties, the devil energy can represent sexual addictions, obsessions, soul ties, bounds, chains, all of the things that we don't necessarily want to be a part of, right? Literal bondage here, okay? So that is a part of the reason why when you guys have attachments, you can develop extreme attachments to either others, or others develop extreme attachments to you. And they don't always necessarily know why. Yeah, it can create, especially like I said, if you guys have some kind of 8th house placements in specific, it can create some really scary ties. Now, when you want to talk about these things and why it is so difficult for Capricorns to disconnect from a soul tie or soul bond, oftentimes it has to do with the other person's intentions in terms of not being able to let go. And then also when it comes to yourself, if you do not step into situations protecting yourself and you create this bond or tie with another individual, it can feel borderline impossible to break, especially in terms of visitations of the past, or just things kind of being attached to you or staying within you, buried within your soil. And so in order to break a soul tie, it takes work. And that is for pretty much everyone, but we are not talking about everyone, we're talking about you. Going through intentionalities as well as, again, spiritual practices to literally break a soul tie or a soul bond, going to a practitioner who can do so. But then also in terms of sitting with yourself and being able to disconnect, you have to remember that you create your own reality. You are at the end of the day in the driver's seat. When you watch me, it is because a part of you is connected to desiring to increase yourself. If you connected to this video, it is I'm simply the vehicle, and you are connecting to a higher part of yourself. You want to disconnect from the bounds of what it means to be connected to a soul tie. So it goes with intention in terms of being able to disconnect, the same way how it goes with intentions in terms of being able to not create that tie at all in the first place. Stepping away from any type of guilt or shame is number one. Shame is the worst crime that you can commit against yourself. I know some people say it's competition or comparison, comparing yourself to other people, but at the core of comparison is shame. It's not feeling good enough. Shame is extremely violent, and it eats away at the sacral chakra, which then starts to eat away at the root and chomps away at the solar plexus. So your solar plexus is where your soul and your light is. So slowly your confidence will eat away because of what's going on in your sacral, which is holding on to shame due to human relations and the way you've connected with others. And then you'll start to feel unstable and incapable of manifesting a life for yourself or standing on your own 2 feet or feeling grounded, which is how it will, which is the result of how shame then steps into the root chakra and eats away at your stability. So when we go and we revisit things like shame, and we go and we talk about things like the soul tie starts within the sacral, because human connections begin within the sacral. Sexual energy, the connection that we have with others is sacral energy. And so when we're understanding this sacral energy and how it is that we can protect it, especially when we're going into connections and dynamics with others, it is knowing how to protect yourself in terms of developing a bit of a shield around yourself, and most importantly, your spiritual self, your heart-centered self, when connecting with another person. 2 things. You must remove shame and self-judgment, and you must be able to protect the emotions and the feelings. Those are the 2 places in which these bonds end up being created, because your vulnerability, when you have shame, you are making yourself vulnerable to another being. When you have emotions for another person, you are making yourself vulnerable to them. So the emotions or the heart connection is not necessarily coming from a bad place or a negative place, but if you know that if you go into this dynamic with another person, you can't necessarily trust them with your emotions, you must protect and shield your heart chakra. You must protect and shield yourself so that you don't create that bond or that tie with the other individual. When it comes to the sacral, this is where, again, we're talking about things like shame, insecurity, needing validation, needing to be accepted, light, all of the above pertaining to the way in which you relate to other individuals. And again, at its core, the sacral chakra in terms of negativity is shame. So when you feel those negative feelings about yourself, when you harbor all of that, the gunk that sits inside the sacral chakra, when you connect with anybody, especially on a sexual level, much less intimate level, but especially on a physical sexual level, you are leaving yourself completely vulnerable and completely open to that person's energy being bounded to you, being bonded to you. That person being able to have a level of control over you that goes way beyond the kind of power that they should be able to have, especially if it's not coming in a healing way or to progress you forward in any way. When you surrender to things like shame, when you surrender to things like the need for another person to determine your worth or your value, a lot of the violent things that we see take place when it comes to sexuality, the way in which people use something as sacred and as powerful as sexual connection to degrade, distort, and deteriorate one another. When you protect yourself from that through an extreme sense of self-value, through an extreme, well, the solar plexus is more self-worth, while the sacral chakra is more self-value. When you understand that energy and you sit within it with extreme self-backing, which is groundedness and confidence, which can be found on the other two sides. When you do that and you surround your sacral chakra, you do a lot of sacral chakra healing work. You do a lot of things pertaining to how to protect that energy. And the sacral chakra is so important because we are constantly creating connections. As I said, soul ties are not just created through sexual intimacy. They're created through intimacy in general. They're just taken to a whole nother level when it comes to physical sexual intimacy. And it doesn't always have to be in a traditional sense, because the same way how any kind of sexual activity induces a soul tie. So it doesn't always have to be the traditional heterosexual way of interconnecting and binding yourself to another person in order to create these kinds of attachments. But just understand that the more, how do you say, DNA that you exchange with another person, the more you're intertwining that person's energy with yours if you are not, especially if you are not equipped to protect yourself. So that's important to understand. And on a very practical level, the more you do to protect yourself from the exchange of DNA is actually a part of what's helping you create more of a disconnection or maintain more of a disconnection when it comes to binding yourself to another person. I think you guys know what I mean by that. So anyway, yeah, so to finish off in terms of you as a Capricorn and the importance of protecting your energy when it comes to soul ties and debunking any kind of myths, especially tied to shame, self-degradation, self-loathing, remove all of those things if you can, obviously through self-love meditations, self-appreciation meditations. It's not always easy when you feel like you've interacted with a person that you're not happy about, or someone that put you in a negative headspace or try to, frankly, spiritually create some kind of war with you. This is especially specific. Well, this is across the board in terms of masculine and feminine people. It just happens usually in a different way. But if someone is trying to inflict shame into you through making you feel used up and making you feel not good enough, that is extremely violent. That is sexual violence. Whether it was the kind of activity where you guys were, where it was consensual or not, this person committed a form of sexual violence onto you because they were trying to energetically wound you. They were trying to spiritually wound you, whether they were conscious of it in terms of the intensity of what it is that they were doing or not. A lot of the time for, let's say, dominant people, because that goes across all boards, a lot of the times for the dominant in the situation, if they are not in a pure space, they gain power from taking yours away. So in their minds, the ability to take your power away is to put you in a position of what they deem as degraded or beneath them. to kind of feed off of your desires or feed off of just you in general, like a parasite. And it's important to be aware of when you're dealing with a sexual parasite, because for some people, and unfortunately, love in relations is a place of war. But it's important to understand, number one, in terms of healing from shame, that anybody that has to see love and relations as a place of war is someone who is dealing with some serious demons on their own. Regardless of the things that you see, again, in pop culture or, the popular world, all of these things are just different ways to normalize very evil and very toxic behavior. If you have to make someone feel shamed or degraded within the depths of themselves, there's something severely broken in you. Whether it was trained, whether it was you living in society where society constantly told you that you had that kind of power, the fact that you need to exercise that kind of power, there's something very much broken in you. The fact that the person has to feel powerful in a moment when they should be feeling connected and vulnerable, regardless of their feelings for you, safety is number one in that dynamic. And if a person is using it for anything other than that, that says more about them than it does about you. Okay? So that's a number one way in which you can help in terms of removing the shame, removing the trauma tied to those things. If you guys want, you can go into the comments and let me know if you want to dive deeper in terms of more things pertaining to sacral chakra healing. I created a membership for the Healing Circle. It's for anybody who wants to join the YouTube version of the Healing Circle. And I was going to put in meditations, and a sacral chakra meditation is something that I would be willing to do, of course, or I'd want to do, in terms of removing that shame and that guilt because of things that have taken place, especially because Capricorn energy can be very attached to their pleasures, can be very attached to physical pleasures. So harboring shame or harboring guilt can be something that is very common for Capricorn placements, because you can be kind of bound or chained by your physical desires. So it's just about pretty much putting yourself in a place where you understand empowerment, and through that empowerment you're able to then get on top of this energy and be able to have these connections and have dynamics with other people where it doesn't feel like you're creating these strong chains that leave you bound. As I was saying, we are all connected. Everything in our life is connected. And so with that, we are all constantly intertwining and interconnecting with one another, regardless. So with that being said, it's not a matter of being afraid of the connections that you have with other people. Use that as a place of empowerment in terms of understanding, well, if we're always connected to one another in some which way, shape, or form, why do I need to be afraid of something like a bond or a chain? You don't have to. It's understanding that whatever connection or whatever dynamic can be controlled by you if you allow it to. But it has to be intentional, and it has to be something that you do with yourself. And most importantly, it starts with removing shame. Removing ideologies that do not work in your favor in terms of the way in which you connect with other people, doing a lot of rituals tied to healing your body, and most importantly, purifying your body after you connect with individuals that you weren't necessarily happy to connect with. Or even if you were happy to connect with, you always need to recenter yourself. Bring back the energy into yourself and the different things you need to do in order to create a disconnection between you and another person. Because even if you are in love with this other person, you are yourself and they are them. And that's how codependent chains get connected, because it's still a soul tie, but we don't always like to call it that because you love the person, it's a happy relationship, but that's how a connection gets too intertwined to a point where it's codependent. You always need to make sure that when you connect, and then you disconnect. Always allow space for that disconnection. The disconnection is under your control. And there are various things that you do on a physical level and then also on a spiritual level to make sure that you're putting yourself back into yourself. Okay? So yeah. I hope this helps. So yeah. Let me know your thoughts, okay? I love you. Ciao.